So, as we've just heard, Glenn Stevens says taking the plunge into highly geared property may not be a great strategy. His warning comes as a new report predicts a 10% fall for Australian house prices within 4 years. Well, fund manager Roger Montgomery joins me now. And yes, Roger, this Capital Economics report, house falls of 10% by 2019, 2020?
I wish that it was possible to be that precise. I think it's going to be a whole lot worse than that. That particular
You're
report,
much more of a Cassandra.
Look, I know that in the short run, things like price to income ratios, debt to income ratios, inflation, unemployment, these things will affect property prices.
Yeah, they talk a lot about debt, I think.
Indeed, but in the long run, it's supply that's the issue, and this time it will be supply that will be the catalyst for lower prices for dwellings in Australia. If we have a look overall, Australia in toto, we know that we require about 150,000 new dwellings a year to soak up household formation. That's what we need. The current run rate, whether you look at commencements or construction, then what we know from the ABS data is we're producing at a rate of about 225,000 a year. So 50% more than what we require. That's been going for about 2 or 3 years, and that assumes that, and we'd end up with about 12 months of oversupply, which, by the way, is roughly what the United States had just before their crash. Mind you, they were, of course, lending $700,000 to Mexican strawberry pickers earning $14,000 a year.
That was rather different in terms of the risk that's loaded onto that.
So what could be the catalyst in Australia? It's going to be apartments. There's no doubt in my mind about that. If we look at Australian statistics, the number in the last 12 months of apartments, and by now I mean units, proper flats and apartments, 96,000 were sold in the last 12 months. Now, the number of pre-purchased apartments due to settle in the next 12 months, this is just new apartments, not new and established, which is the previous figure I gave, but just new apartments, is 92,000. Now, last year's number was based on a boom in the property market. So there were more transactions than there normally are anyway. What we also know...
But is this trend going to continue, though? I mean, if people
see this... Well, the oversupply will continue because even though the banks have stopped lending to developers, we know that they're still securing finance from high net worth individuals through mezzanine finance. They're continuing to construct. They're continuing to oversupply. So the oversupply number of 12 months that I gave earlier, that presupposes that they stop developing now. They're still developing. Now, here's the problem. We know that the banks are already lowering the LVRs, so their loan-to-value ratios are dropping from night. So if you were able to buy $1 million apartment and only pay a $100,000 deposit because the LVR was 90%, that's been dropped now to 80% or 75%. So you need a bigger deposit in order to settle that apartment. We also know that the Chinese demand has declined, and a lot of those deposits that were paid were based on Chinese investors expecting to be able to get more of their money out of China when it came time to settle, but they're not able to get the money out.
But significantly, you obviously think that there is a definite knock-on effect from apartments to the rest of the housing market.
Absolutely. So we're looking at the catalyst being apartments, but if I can use a Chinese equivalent to a proverb, if you like, if you drop a pebble in the middle of the pond, eventually the ripples affect the entire pond. Property is priced relatively. So if apartments were to fall by 20% or 30%, and I don't think that's unreasonable in the next 18 months, then what we would probably find is that buyers of a 2-bedroom dwelling are simply not going to turn up to the auction for a house that hasn't fallen.
And you reckon this will have an impact over the next 12, 18 months?
Indeed. Indeed it will, because what will happen is the developers, and the number that I gave you earlier, the 92,000 apartments due to settle, remember, apartments were developed and construction started with only 60 or 70% or 80% pre-sold.
Yes.
Now, they're not all going to settle, and we know that there's 30 or 40% more supply than that.
Briefly, you mentioned the M word, mezzanine, that was funding some of these developments. Are we likely to get problems with investors who are helping them invest?
Indeed. Absolutely. They're not going to be able to sell these apartments at full price. They'll have to discount them, and that means a lower return to everyone.
Roger Montgomery, we'll keep on this with you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.